Rain pelted the courthouse steps in thick, cold sheets, turning the marble slabs slick and shiny like black ice. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, cameras poised, microphones trembling in the wind, murmuring speculation about the trial that had gripped the city for weeks. 3-year-old Lily clung to her mother's coat, her tiny fingers scrunching the fabric as if it were a lifeline. She didn't understand why so many strangers with big lenses and bigger voices were staring at her, but she sensed the tension, the sharp electric hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was suffocating. The smell of polished wood, paper, and disinfectant mingled with something heavier: fear. Lawyers whispered to each other in clipped tones. Jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting to every corner of the room. The accused sat rigid, hands clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white, eyes fixed straight ahead as though daring anyone to look back. Titan, a massive German shepherd trained in police work, lay perfectly still beside his handler, his muscles taut under his shiny coat, his ears twitching at every sound. Cameras clicked and whirred in short bursts, capturing the uneasy calm. The judge's gavel banged sharply against the desk. "Order in the courtroom!" His voice cracked, slightly betraying his own nerves. The crowd's murmurs softened, but the tension didn't leave. Everyone waited, holding their breath as the trial began to unfold again. The air seemed to thicken. Then, in the middle of the hushed courtroom, Lily slipped her tiny hand free from her mother's grip. She toddled forward, small feet padding against the cold floor, eyes wide with curiosity and some unspoken resolve. Whispers erupted from the spectators. "Let her alone! The child shouldn't be," but she ignored them. She stopped mid-step, raising a tiny, trembling finger. All eyes followed it, and then she pointed at Titan. The dog's head snapped up, ears stiffening, muscles coiled like springs. He wasn't supposed to react unless commanded, but something in the child's gesture made him pause, gaze locked. The courtroom collectively exhaled in a long, taut sigh. Gasps echoed as people leaned forward in their chairs. The accused's face drained of color. Prosecutors and defense attorneys froze mid-sentence, mouths agape. Journalists clicked their cameras furiously, instinctively capturing every microsecond of this inexplicable interaction. "Mommy, he's the one," Lily whispered softly, almost as if the words were meant only for Titan to hear. Her mother's heart caught in her throat. She knelt, ready to pull her daughter back, but Lily didn't budge. Her tiny frame radiated an unexpected authority. Titan, sensing her calm and certainty, inched forward slightly, eyes never leaving the child. The accused swallowed hard, sweat beading at his hairline. His lawyer whispered something urgently, a cautionary reminder of procedure and evidence, but the words seemed to evaporate under the weight of what was unfolding. Titan shifted again, low growl rumbling deep in his chest. The room held its breath. Was the dog sensing danger or truth? Outside the courtroom, rain continued its relentless assault, but inside, time seemed to slow. The fluorescent lights flickered once, briefly plunging the room into shadows before buzzing back to life. Lily's tiny finger remained extended, unwavering. The jurors exchanged anxious glances, whispering questions they dared not voice aloud. Is this normal behavior? What is she pointing at? Even the court reporter hesitated, pen poised, unsure whether to capture notes or simply watch. The judge cleared his throat, finally regaining some semblance of control. "Young lady, step back to your mother, please," he said. His voice wavered slightly, betraying a mixture of authority and disbelief. Lily looked at him, then back at Titan, a small frown forming as if the judge's words were irrelevant in the grand calculus of justice. She did not move. Her mother's heart pounded as she reached for her, but Lily's expression held something the adults could not name. There was innocence there, yes, but also clarity, a raw sense of perception that made every adult in the room suddenly feel small, exposed, and uncertain. Titan's handler tightened his grip on the leash, muscles straining. Titan did not move, yet his eyes flicked once toward the accused, then back to Lily, as though confirming some silent understanding between them. The accused's jaw trembled. For the first time in the trial, he looked genuinely afraid, not of the law, not of the judge, but of the child and the dog together. He shifted in his seat, voice barely audible as he muttered to his attorney. The courtroom collectively leaned in, trying to catch a word, but it was drowned in the hum of suspense that now filled the space like smoke. And then, just as everyone thought the moment might fade, Lily lifted her other hand slightly, pointing again, this time past Titan toward the witness stand. A silence heavier than the rain outside fell over the room. Cameras clicked again, flashes illuminating the tense faces of everyone present. Some jurors leaned forward instinctively, hearts hammering. The prosecutors exchanged a glance that carried unspoken fear. Titan growled softly, a low, warning rumble vibrating through his chest. The accused froze entirely, his gaze flicking nervously toward the tiny child and the massive dog. Lily's mother held her breath, knowing she could not intervene without breaking the fragile, electrifying tension that had gripped the courtroom. And in that charged, fleeting moment, everyone understood, even without words, that something had shifted. The trial, the testimonies, the evidence, they were all secondary now. The room collectively realized that a 3-year-old and a police dog had become the center of a storm that no adult could fully predict. The gavel remained silent. The whispers died in mouths that suddenly could not speak. And in the corner of the room, Titan's ears twitched once, sensing something no one else could, as Lily's small finger remained unwavering, pointing directly at the truth, and the unimaginable consequence that was about to follow. The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as everyone's attention locked onto the child and the dog. Titan's growl rumbled low, almost imperceptible, but it carried through the room like distant thunder. His handler, Officer Martinez, tightened his grip on the leash, unsure whether to step forward or let the moment play out. Titan was trained for danger, for tracking, for obedience, but nothing in his years of service had prepared him for this, a toddler pointing with quiet certainty and a man whose guilt, or fear, was suddenly palpable. The accused, Michael Harper, had been confident just moments before. He had rehearsed his defense countless times, memorized every statement, and believed the jury would never doubt him. But now sweat glistened on his brow and his confident mask cracked. His eyes darted between Titan and Lily, panic creeping in. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something urgent, but his voice was shaky, almost hysterical. Words had failed him already. "Judge, what is this?" whispered one of the jurors, voice barely audible. She adjusted her glasses, her knuckles white on the wooden railing. The others could only nod, wide-eyed, frozen. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the courtroom had been suspended in a bubble where ordinary rules no longer applied. Lily's mother, Sarah, crouched slightly, trying to catch her daughter's attention. "Honey, come back," she whispered softly, but Lily didn't respond. Her eyes never left Titan. Her small hand trembled slightly as she extended her finger again, and the dog's head followed the motion, ears alert, tail stiff, muscles coiled. Officer Martinez's pulse raced. Titan had been in hundreds of tense situations, drug raids, armed standoffs, but something about this child made him hesitate. It wasn't fear, it wasn't training, it was recognition. His nose twitched, scanning the air, catching a scent that made his hackles rise and his jaw tighten. He inched forward but remained perfectly controlled, as if he knew this was no ordinary threat. The judge, trying to maintain authority, cleared his throat. "Counsel, please maintain order. This is a courtroom, not whatever this." He stopped, realizing no words could contain the moment. Even he was holding his breath. The whispers of reporters and spectators faded into a tense silence. Michael Harper's lawyer leaned close, voice urgent and low. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. A child." His protest died mid-sentence. Titan growled again, low and menacing, drawing everyone's gaze. The accused recoiled, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. The jurors exchanged nervous glances. They had seen many dramatic trials, but never this. Never a toddler commanding the room without even realizing it. Then Lily whispered something, barely audible, yet it carried an unnatural clarity. "He did it." The words froze the room. Gasps erupted. Spectators clutched their seats. The judge's gavel trembled in his hand. The prosecutor leaned forward, heart pounding. "Your Honor, did she just—" But before he could finish, Lily lifted her other hand, pointing directly at the accused, voice firm. "Him." Titan stiffened. His growl deepened, almost a warning, as if the dog himself were confirming the child's declaration. The accused's eyes widened. He muttered something incoherent, rising slightly in his chair, trembling. His lawyer reached out, trying to calm him, but the words fell flat. The courtroom's air had turned electric, charged with tension and fear. Every eye was locked on the child and the dog, the invisible connection pulsing like a wire strung taut across the room. Sarah's heart raced. She tried to reason with Lily, whispering, "Sweetheart, step back." But Lily's gaze was unwavering. She had seen something in Titan, something that told her what adults could not, what they had missed all along. Titan, trained to detect danger, was now reacting not to a stranger, not to a threat in the usual sense, but to truth. A reporter's camera clicked repeatedly, flashes illuminating faces in shock. The courtroom murmured, half disbelief, half awe. Jurors whispered in tension. How can a toddler, how can a dog, expose the truth like this? Every adult felt their authority crumble under the unlikeliest of witnesses. Officer Martinez, sensing the moment's gravity, tightened the leash slightly, stepping closer to Titan. The dog's eyes never left Michael Harper. The accused now realized something terrifying. The entire courtroom could see what he could not hide. The weight of years of preparation, rehearsed lies, and calculated calm seemed to collapse in that instant. Then a faint click echoed in the courtroom. A single camera had recorded the moment, the finger, the whisper, the recognition. Prosecutors exchanged urgent glances. Evidence, credibility, and instinct collided in the tense atmosphere, and yet it was still Lily and Titan who held the room's attention. The neighbor, a man who had provided testimony for the prosecution, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His gaze flicked toward the child, then to Titan and back at Michael. He swallowed hard, adjusting his tie, as if realizing he might have been overlooking something crucial. His silence was deafening, yet spoke louder than words ever could. "Order," the judge tried again, voice stronger this time, though his hands trembled. "The child back to her mother, we will proceed with the trial." But Lily didn't budge. Her small hand remained raised, the tip of her finger unwavering. Titan took a slow, deliberate step forward, growling low. The accused's breath hitched, every muscle in his body tensed. Sarah's heart pounded. She had never imagined that her daughter, so small and innocent, could command such attention. And yet in that courtroom, the child and the dog had created a force field of truth, cutting through years of lies and fear. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, knowing the moment was only beginning. And then, as if on cue, the fluorescent lights flickered violently above, casting sharp shadows that danced across the courtroom. Cameras flashed uncontrollably. Titan growled again, deep and resonant. The accused froze completely, realization dawning in his eyes. Everyone leaned forward instinctively, drawn into the unfolding storm. At that instant, the room understood. No one had been ready for this. Not the lawyers, not the judge, not the jurors, and certainly not the accused. The trial had been turned upside down by the smallest voice in the room, amplified by a dog trained to detect the truth. Lily's tiny hand remained raised, tight and tense at her side, and the courtroom held its breath, waiting for the next move, knowing that something impossible, something devastating was about to be revealed. 2 weeks earlier, the city had been quiet, unsuspecting, a suburban morning like any other. Sunlight gleamed off the freshly washed cars, sprinklers hissed on green lawns, and children's laughter echoed faintly from backyard playgrounds. But at the Harper residence, chaos had broken through that calm. Police cars screeched into the driveway at dawn, tires spinning on wet asphalt. Titan led the team with precision, crashing through the front door in a cloud of shattered wood and dust. Officers had shouted, orders blending into a cacophony that left neighbors frozen in their lawns, eyes wide in disbelief. Inside, they found a hidden closet beneath the stairs. A blood-stained jacket lay crumpled inside, evidence of a violent struggle no one had been able to explain. Michael Harper had been arrested, cuffed, and led out while Lily's mother scooped her trembling daughter into her arms. Lily had cried inconsolably, frightened by the flashing lights, the shouting, and Titan's imposing presence. But the dog had stayed calm near her, as if recognizing her vulnerability, offering silent reassurance. That memory now lingered in Sarah's mind, sharp and raw as glass. Now in the courtroom, Lily's tiny finger still pointed steadily at Titan. The dog's massive body remained poised, muscles tense, gaze fixed, not on her mother, not on the accused, but on the one person in the room who held the key to unraveling everything. Every adult felt a shiver run down their spine. The trial had been meticulously scheduled, evidence carefully catalogued, but none of it prepared anyone for the silent communication unfolding between child and dog. Prosecutors exchanged urgent glances. They had been waiting for a breakthrough, a witness, a confession. But the revelation was coming in a form no one had imagined, a toddler's words and Titan's instinct. The defense attorney's face paled. "Your Honor, this is preposterous," he said, though his voice quavered. Even he could feel that what was happening had shifted the entire courtroom dynamic. Michael Harper's eyes darted to the witness stand, where Mr. Reynolds, the neighbor, fidgeted nervously. Reynolds had been a key witness, providing testimony that had initially seemed solid. But now, with Lily pointing and Titan's growl rumbling, he seemed unsteady, almost guilty under the weight of unseen scrutiny. He avoided eye contact, twisting his fingers around his notes, as if trying to anchor himself to some fabricated sense of control. The judge leaned forward, gavel in hand, voice wavering slightly. "Child, if you have something to say, speak clearly, otherwise please step back." Lily's small lips parted. The courtroom fell completely silent, the hum of anticipation thick enough to taste. Then she whispered, her voice small but crystal clear. "He did it." A collective gasp swept through the room. The jurors leaned forward, hearts hammering. The prosecutors sat upright, eyes wide. Even the court stenographer's fingers froze over the typewriter keys, hesitant to capture words that seemed almost impossible to believe. The weight of Lily's declaration pressed down on everyone in the room. Titan's ears twitched, nostrils flaring as if confirming the truth in her words. The low rumble of his growl vibrated through the courtroom floorboards, making jurors shift uneasily. Michael Harper's confident composure disintegrated entirely. His shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth to speak, but words died in his throat, replaced by a guttural, instinctual panic. The neighbor Reynolds finally spoke, but his voice cracked. He stammered, tripping over his own sentences, and then stopped entirely, realizing every eye was on him, judging every hesitation. The courtroom seemed to stretch, time slowing to expose the smallest movements, the tiniest details, each breath hanging in the air like a fragile thread about to snap. Officer Martinez shifted slightly, ready to step in, but Titan remained perfectly still, controlled yet alert. The bond between child and dog had formed something invisible, a line of truth no one else could cross. Lily raised her hand again, trembling slightly, pointing toward the witness stand where Reynolds sat, pale and shaking. The tension was unbearable, like a wire stretched taut across the room. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had never imagined her daughter would be capable of this kind of influence, of this kind of clarity. Lily's innocence had become a force, cutting through deception, shaking the foundations of a trial that had been meticulously planned and rehearsed. Then suddenly the lights flickered violently. Shadows danced across the walls, stretching and twisting faces in grotesque patterns. The room collectively held its breath. Titan growled again, sharper this time, and stepped forward slightly, still tethered by the leash but moving with purpose. The accused recoiled in his chair, eyes wide with fear. "Order," the judge bellowed, though his voice lacked its usual authority. Even he was unsettled. Every adult present had sensed the invisible shift. Something primal had entered the courtroom. The undeniable power of truth, unfiltered and undeniable. And then Lily whispered again, almost to herself, "He hit it." The words reverberated through the room like a hammer striking steel. The accused paled, and Reynolds froze mid-gesture, caught in the glare of the moment. Prosecutors exchanged glances, their hearts pounding with the possibility that the child's words could unravel the entire defense. The jurors were on the edge of their seats, leaning forward instinctively. Sarah clutched her daughter tightly but dared not pull her away. She realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that Lily was seeing things adults had missed. Titan, sensing the weight of the revelation, took another deliberate step forward. His massive body radiated power, his gaze locked on Reynolds and Michael simultaneously. The courtroom trembled under the intensity, every adult feeling the gravity of a moment no one could have anticipated. And in that charged silence, the trial's trajectory shifted irrevocably. No one was ready for the combination of a 3-year-old's perception and a police dog's instinct. Secrets long hidden, truths long buried, and lies long rehearsed hovered on the edge of revelation. Every eye in the courtroom followed Lily and Titan, knowing without speaking that the next move could shatter lives, and that the smallest voice in the room might change everything. The tension thickened, hanging like fog over the polished floorboards. Every breath seemed loud, every heartbeat magnified. The trial was no longer about procedure, evidence, or testimony. It had become a silent standoff between innocence, instinct, and guilt. And then a muffled sound came from the back of the courtroom. A phone buzzing, an envelope shifting, something small but significant. And every head turned instantly, anticipation coiling in the air like a tightly wound spring. Something was about to happen, something no one had expected, and it was all because of a 3-year-old, a dog, and the truths they had already begun to reveal. The courtroom's silence was suffocating. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pause, leaving only the low rumble of Titan's growl vibrating through the polished floorboards. Every eye was fixed on Lily, who remained motionless, tiny hand raised, her gaze locked on the neighbor, Mr. Reynolds. He fidgeted in his seat, knuckles whitening around his notes, face pale and tight with tension. Every shallow breath he took seemed to echo unnaturally, amplified by the collective anticipation of the room. The judge cleared his throat again, trying to reclaim authority. "Mr. Reynolds, please state your testimony clearly, and child, return to your mother." His voice trembled, betraying the strain of containing a room suddenly charged with an invisible energy. But Lily didn't move. Her small lips parted, and in a soft yet piercing voice she said, "He's lying." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Jurors leaned forward, some gripping the edges of their seats, hearts pounding. Prosecutors froze, eyes wide, realizing the weight of the words. Defense attorneys whispered urgently to their client, Michael Harper, whose confident facade had completely dissolved. Harper's jaw trembled, his fingers digging into his lap. Titan's ears pricked, growl deepening. Every muscle in the dog's massive frame tensed, alert, aware, as if anticipating the next truth to reveal itself. Mr. Reynolds shifted nervously, eyes darting to the judge, then to the jurors, then finally down at his trembling hands. Sweat glistened on his brow, and he swallowed hard. I don't remember," he stammered, voice quivering. The judge raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "You swore under oath that you witnessed these events. You may speak clearly or face contempt, Mr. Reynolds." Titan growled again, low and guttural, sending a shiver through the courtroom. The sound wasn't threatening, it was accusatory. It carried a weight no human voice could match. The jurors flinched. The defense attorney's hands twitched as he muttered, "He's panicking. This is preposterous." But even he didn't fully believe his own words. Lily raised her hand a little higher, pointing with absolute certainty. "He hit it," she whispered again, a tremor of conviction in her tone. The judge blinked, incredulous. "Child, speak clearly." But Lily's words didn't require amplification. They carried themselves. The room seemed to lean closer, the tension pulling everyone into the vortex of her small, unwavering truth. Michael Harper's breathing grew shallow fast. What is she saying?" he muttered to his lawyer, panic beginning to edge into hysteria. But the words fell flat. The courtroom now followed the child and the dog more than any spoken testimony or legal argument. Even seasoned reporters felt the story slipping out of the ordinary into something primal and real. The neighbor Reynolds shifted again, biting his lip. The sweat trickled down his temple. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowed, tried again. I didn't see, I didn't want to get involved," he admitted finally, voice shaky, eyes flicking toward Titan. The dog's gaze never wavered, ears stiff, growl vibrating through his chest, as if confirming the child's accusation. Sarah's heart raced. She could barely comprehend what was unfolding. Her daughter, a 3-year-old, was exposing a truth that adults had carefully hidden. Every instinct in her body told her to step forward, to pull Lily away, to intervene. But she stayed frozen, aware that doing so might break the fragile chain of revelation that had already begun. Prosecutors whispered frantically to each other, notes rustling, pens scratching across paper. The tension was so thick that it seemed to press in from the walls. Every person in the courtroom felt the gravity of what was happening. The witness had faltered, the accused's facade had cracked, and a child and a dog now held the invisible scales of justice. Titan shifted slightly, taking one deliberate step toward Reynolds. The neighbor flinched, rising slightly in his chair, hands frozen in mid-motion. Titan's growl intensified, a sound that resonated with a mix of authority and warning. Michael Harper's breathing grew ragged. "Stop, he's just a dog," he hissed to his lawyer. But the words had no effect. No one doubted what was happening anymore. Lily repeated her small accusation, louder this time. "He took it! He hid it!" The courtroom erupted into whispers and gasps. Even the judge leaned forward, lips pressed tightly together, unsure whether to intervene or allow the child's voice to guide the unfolding drama. Titan's tail stiffened, his entire body poised, vibrating with an energy that was impossible to ignore. The atmosphere thickened, electric and suffocating. Jurors were caught between disbelief and fear, leaning instinctively toward the child's truth. The media cameras clicked and flashed, documenting what no one had ever anticipated. A toddler's words, a police dog's instinct, and the unraveling of carefully constructed lies. Suddenly the lights flickered violently, sending shadows rippling across the courtroom walls. The judge tapped the gavel, commanding order, but the energy in the room was uncontainable. Titan barked sharply once, a sound that froze every person mid-motion. Every eye turned toward the source of the sound. The accused, Michael Harper, slumped back, hands gripping the edge of his chair, fear etched into every line of his face. Sarah gripped Lily's hand tightly, holding her close, aware that the child's innocence had become a weapon no one could counter. Every breath in the courtroom felt measured, tense, waiting. Reynolds fidgeted, looking like a cornered animal. Titan's gaze never wavered. Lily's hand remained raised, pointing unwaveringly, her tiny finger a beacon that pierced the smoke of lies and deception. And then, just as the tension peaked, a faint sound came from the back of the courtroom. A soft rustle, a phone vibrating, a subtle movement in a stack of papers. Every head turned instinctively. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Something was about to be revealed, something that would further unravel the fragile web of secrets surrounding the trial. No one was ready. The child, the dog, the trembling neighbor, they were converging toward a moment that would change everything. And in that courtroom, filled with law and order, evidence and authority, the smallest voice and the most loyal instincts were about to overturn the balance of power entirely. Cameras exploded to life. Flashes illuminated every corner of the courtroom, reflecting off polished wood and the sweat-dampened faces of adults who suddenly realized they were spectators to something unprecedented. The murmurs that had been whispered in fear now became loud gasps, as journalists tried to capture every flicker of movement between the 3-year-old and Titan, the massive German shepherd whose presence dominated the room. Lily, small but unshakable, lifted her hand again, pointing at Mr. Reynolds. Her voice, steady despite her age, echoed like a bell through the heavy air. He lied about the jacket. He hid it. The jurors leaned forward instinctively, eyes wide, pulses racing. Every adult in the room felt the weight of the statement. Titan's low growl vibrated through the floorboards, a sound so deep and resonant it seemed to press against every chest. Officer Martinez's grip on the leash tightened, knuckles white, as the dog's focus never wavered. Michael Harper's face went pale and his confident mask crumbled entirely. "Stop this! It's nonsense!" he hissed at his attorney, voice trembling with panic. But no one listened. The trial was no longer about testimony or cross-examination. It had become a silent standoff of truth and instinct with a toddler and a dog at its center. Prosecutors whispered urgently to each other, scanning the courtroom for any sign that this revelation could be corroborated. "Judge, we need to. This changes everything. He's contradicting his own testimony," one said under her breath, but her words were swallowed by the tension. Reynolds fidgeted, twisting his notes until they crumpled slightly in his hands. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowed hard. I didn't think it mattered," he finally stammered, voice small and cracking. "I saw the jacket, but I didn't want to." His gaze flicked nervously toward Titan, whose growl deepened, resonating in the room. The judge leaned forward, tapping the gavel lightly, trying to assert authority. "Mr. Reynolds, you swore under oath. You must tell the truth. The court will not tolerate further hesitation." Titan's growl shifted into a low, deliberate warning. He stepped slightly closer to the witness stand, each movement controlled but deliberate, as if signaling the gravity of the situation. Lily's finger remained pointed, unwavering, and every person in the courtroom felt the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Michael Harper's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering frantically, "This is chaos. The child, the dog, this isn't allowed." But Harper was shaking, eyes wide with fear. The confident, calculated man who had walked into this courtroom hours ago had vanished. Sarah's heart pounded as she held Lily's hand, knowing the child had become an unwitting force of justice. Every instinct screamed at her to pull Lily away, to shield her from what was unfolding. But she remained still, afraid that any interference could unravel the fragile momentum of truth her daughter had begun to command. Lily's words rang out again, louder this time. "He knows. He hid it from everyone." Her small voice carried an authority that defied her age. Jurors exchanged glances, uncertainty and curiosity flashing in their eyes. The prosecutors sat straighter, adrenaline sharpening their focus. The defense attorney paled, realizing that the narrative he had meticulously crafted was slipping through his fingers like sand. Reynolds' hands shook uncontrollably. I put it in the closet. I didn't think anyone would notice." His admission sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Titan's ears pricked, growls subsiding slightly, as if acknowledging that the truth had finally begun to emerge. Michael Harper's face went white. You, how could you?" he muttered, voice cracking with disbelief. The judge's gavel slammed down, demanding silence, but no one could contain the sudden surge of energy. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashing nonstop. The courtroom was alive with tension, a storm of fear, revelation, and disbelief swirling in every corner. Prosecutors exchanged urgent glances. This corroborates our case," one whispered. "We need to move quickly." But before anyone could act, Titan stepped closer to Lily, lowering his massive head. The child gently placed her tiny hand on his nose, and a hush fell over the room. Every adult sensed a moment of undeniable truth, primal and pure, bridging the innocence of the child and the instinct of the dog. Michael Harper's breathing grew erratic, shallow, as he realized the courtroom had shifted entirely against him. His lawyer reached for the evidence table, trying to maintain control, but it was too late. The fabric of his defense had frayed, shredded by the unlikeliest of witnesses, a toddler and a dog who had sensed deception in ways humans could not. Then the moment intensified further. One of the prosecutors opened a file, retrieving a photograph of the blood-stained jacket. The court collectively leaned forward, jaws tightening. The image was undeniable. Titan growled low, deep, confirming what Lily had pointed out hours earlier. Every juror's eyes widened. The accused, once smug, now trembled visibly, his world collapsing. The room's atmosphere was electric. Reporters snapped photos and scribbled notes frantically. The judge adjusted his glasses, leaning forward, gavel at the ready, but uncertain how to command control. Titan remained beside Lily, giant yet calm, exuding a protective aura. And then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, a faint rustle came from the back of the courtroom. A phone vibrated, papers shifted. Every head turned instinctively, drawn to the subtle sound. A new piece of evidence, or perhaps a secret long hidden, was about to surface. The room held its breath, frozen, waiting. No one had been ready for this level of revelation. Not the defense, not the prosecution, not the jurors, not the spectators. A 3-year-old and a dog had rewritten the rules of the courtroom, exposing lies, fear, and hidden truths in a way no adult could control. And as the rustle grew louder, every person in that room sensed the same terrifying, electrifying truth. What was about to happen next could shatter lives and change everything about the trial in ways no one could have predicted. The courtroom erupted. Lawyers shouted over one another. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashing so rapidly they almost blurred the tense scene into motion. The previously rigid structure of the trial had dissolved into chaos, yet everyone remained rooted to the floor, eyes locked on the central figures. Lily, Titan, and the trembling neighbor, Mr. Reynolds. Titan's low growl resonated again, vibrating through the polished floorboards. He stepped slightly forward, enormous paws silent but deliberate, as though nudging the truth out into the open. Officer Martinez held the leash firmly but allowed the dog the subtle freedom to move closer, knowing Titan's instincts were leading the way. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste, suffocating in its intensity. Lily, still gripping her mother's hand, did not flinch. Her small frame radiated a surprising authority, a sense of clarity that belied her age. She lifted her other hand slightly, pointing not just at Reynolds but past him, toward the evidence table where the blood-stained jacket had been laid hours before. Her voice was small, yet it carried through the courtroom like a bell in a storm. He hid it behind the floorboards. The room froze. Jurors leaned forward, some gripping the arms of their chairs, eyes wide in disbelief. Even the judge leaned in, brow furrowed, gavel idle in his hand. Prosecutors whispered urgently to each other, realizing that Lily's words aligned perfectly with Titan's instincts and with the evidence they had gathered, but the way it had unfolded defied logic, order, and any precedent. Michael Harper's face had turned ashen. His knuckles whitened on the chair arms and his lips trembled. "Stop! This is insane!" he hissed, panic lacing his words. But no one listened. The trial had shifted beyond argument, beyond procedure. It had become a revelation of truth, instinct, and perception, commanded by the smallest voice in the room and the most disciplined instincts of a police dog. Reynolds' hands shook uncontrollably. His eyes darted between Titan and Lily, between the prosecutors and the jury. His voice quivered, barely audible. I thought I didn't know anyone would see." Sweat glistened across his temples as his defenses crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. Titan growled again, longer this time, a warning and a confirmation in a single primal sound. The courtroom collectively leaned closer, as if drawn to the gravity of what was happening. Reporters clicked frantically, flashes reflecting in terrified, sweat-dampened faces. Even the most seasoned officers in the room felt the chill of authenticity radiating from Titan's posture and Lily's unwavering gaze. Sarah gripped Lily's hand tightly, heart pounding. Her daughter, unaware of the magnitude of her actions, had become a silent authority, unraveling layers of lies that adults had spent weeks constructing. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to intervene, to pull her daughter away, but something in Lily's certainty, in Titan's presence, told her to stay still, to watch, to wait. Prosecutors moved quickly, retrieving the jacket from the evidence table. One of them held it up for the jury to see, pointing out the bloodstains that clearly corroborated Lily's statements. Titan sniffed the air, nose twitching, growl softening slightly, acknowledging the alignment of evidence and instinct. The accused's confidence was gone. Harper's lawyer whispered, frantically trying to salvage something from the crumbling defense, but his voice carried little authority. Then a muffled sound came from the back of the courtroom. A phone vibrated sharply on the table, startling everyone. The judge's gavel slammed down as he demanded attention, but no one could ignore the subtle movement. A deputy picked up the phone and handed it to the prosecution. They swiveled it around for the judge and jury to see. A recording had been discovered. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Michael Harper's breathing grew shallow. He leaned forward, lips moving silently as he mouthed frantic words to his attorney. Reynolds' face blanched even further, realizing that the chain of evidence was now beyond repair. Titan's ears pricked, nostrils flaring, as if he could sense the final pieces of the puzzle settling into place. Lily's tiny hand remained pointed, unwavering, directing everyone's attention to the sequence of events that had been carefully hidden. The 3-year-old's words, combined with Titan's instincts, had begun to expose the full scale of deception. Even the most skeptical jurors found themselves leaning forward instinctively, hearts racing. The judge's gavel fell lightly, a signal to calm the room, but his own voice betrayed awe. "Mr. Reynolds, you may explain now. The court expects honesty." The neighbor's hands trembled, voice quivering. I put the jacket there. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I thought hiding it would protect him. I didn't think." His words faltered, leaving a roomful of adults reeling. Titan barked sharply, a single note of warning and acknowledgement. Lily's hand lowered slightly, a subtle shift that seemed almost ceremonial. The room felt the unspoken understanding. The truth had emerged. The child had spoken. The dog had confirmed. Evidence aligned. Michael Harper's shoulders sagged in defeat. Sweat poured down his face. He whispered something inaudible to his lawyer, the last shred of his composure gone. Jurors sat forward, pens poised, ready to record testimony that had just transformed into revelation. The prosecution's team exchanged nods, adrenaline surging as they prepared to tie everything together. And then, just as the courtroom seemed to breathe a collective sigh, the lights flickered violently. Shadows stretched across the walls, distorting faces. Titan growled, and even Lily flinched slightly. Every person in the room sensed that the climax had not yet arrived, that a final revelation, still hidden, waited to surface. The courtroom held its breath, poised on the edge of discovery. Every instinct in every adult told them that the next moments would change everything. And at the center of it all stood a 3-year-old girl and a police dog, silent sentinels of truth, holding a courtroom hostage with nothing more than instinct, clarity, and courage. No one had been ready for this. No one could have predicted it. And yet in that charged, suffocating courtroom, the unlikeliest witnesses were about to see the final truths exposed. Recess ended in uneasy silence. The jurors filed back into the courtroom, their expressions taut with anticipation. The media cameras, now relentless, clicked and flashed at every move, capturing the unthinkable, a 3-year-old and a police dog dominating the courtroom narrative. Everyone waited for the next act of revelation, hearts hammering, breaths shallow. Lily sat on her mother's lap, small hands clutching the fabric of Sarah's dress. Her wide eyes scanned the room, bright, observant, yet calm. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every adult in the room sensed that she had already seen what others were only beginning to understand. Titan remained at Officer Martinez's side, enormous and controlled, his eyes sharp, scanning every movement of Michael Harper and Reynolds. The accused shifted in his seat, jaw tight, forehead glistening with sweat. Michael Harper had lost control, and his facade of confidence had long vanished. He whispered something to his lawyer, but the words were drowned in the hum of tension, the low rumble of Titan's growl, and the expectant gaze of the jurors. Every instinct in his body screamed fear, yet he could not anticipate what was coming next. Prosecutors rose slowly, moving toward the evidence table. "Your Honor, the court has obtained a recording and additional documentation that corroborates the testimony provided by the child and by physical evidence," one said, her voice steady but urgent. She held up a phone, displaying a time-stamped recording of Reynolds' earlier actions. The moment he hid the blood-stained jacket behind the floorboards, caught unwittingly on a neighbor's surveillance camera. A hush swept through the room. Even the defense attorney froze, staring at the screen, realizing that their carefully constructed narrative was collapsing in real time. Harper's eyes widened. "No, that can't," he trailed off, trembling. The judge adjusted his glasses, leaning forward. Mr. Reynolds, you are required to testify truthfully. It is clear there are inconsistencies in your prior statements. Speak now. Reynolds swallowed, hands trembling violently. His eyes darted to Titan, then to Lily, and finally down at the polished floor. I hid it, he stammered, voice barely above a whisper. I saw the jacket, but I didn't want anyone to get in trouble. I thought if I hid it, no one would know. I didn't think anyone would see. Titan growled low and deep, his warning reverberating through the courtroom. Every juror shivered. The dog stepped slightly forward, controlled but deliberate, a physical manifestation of the truth now exposed. Michael Harper's face drained of color. Sweat ran down his temple. He leaned back, hands gripping the arms of his chair, eyes wide with fear. Lily's small hand lifted again, pointing directly at Reynolds. You lied, she said, voice clear and unwavering. The courtroom collectively gasped. The jurors leaned forward, unable to look away. The child's tiny accusation held more weight than the seasoned attorneys, the evidence, or the gavel itself. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the full scope of what was unfolding. Her daughter, innocent yet perceptive, had become the focal point of the courtroom's moral compass. She glanced down at Lily, a mixture of awe, fear, and pride flooding her chest. The child's small hand had revealed more than years of testimony ever could. Prosecutors moved quickly, presenting additional evidence. A photograph showing Reynolds handling the jacket and a statement from a nearby neighbor corroborating the sequence of events. Each piece of evidence tightened the noose around Harper and Reynolds alike. Titan's body remained rigid, ears pricked, eyes locked, as if confirming every truth presented. The judge slammed his gavel lightly. This court will not tolerate deception. Mr. Reynolds, your testimony is now under scrutiny. Every word you speak will be weighed with the utmost attention. Reynolds' voice cracked. I thought I was protecting someone. I didn't know it would. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Tears began to stream down his face. The room shifted, tense with a mixture of shock and awe. Even Harper looked shaken, realizing that the carefully crafted defense had unraveled in a storm of childlike clarity and canine instinct. Titan took a deliberate step closer to Lily. She extended her small hand and touched his nose. The room felt an almost tangible release, a silent acknowledgement that the truth had prevailed in this small, unexpected exchange. The jurors shifted in their seats, scribbling notes furiously, trying to capture every nuance, every sign of guilt, and every demonstration of innocence. Michael Harper's face was pale, his lips quivering. This is possible, he muttered. But it was. The combination of Lily's observations, Titan's instincts, and the corroborating evidence had exposed the deception. The courtroom was alive with tension, electric, every participant caught in the gravity of what had transpired. Prosecutors exchanged determined glances, ready to tie together the child's testimony, the dog's behavior, and the irrefutable evidence. The judge leaned forward, voice heavy with seriousness. The court recognizes the unique circumstances here. The testimony of this child, combined with corroborating evidence, cannot be ignored. Titan's growl softened, his eyes sweeping across the room before resting on Lily. The child smiled faintly, her innocence untouched, yet her impact undeniable. Every person in that courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, the convergence of intuition, instinct, and truth in a way no law book could fully capture. Then a subtle noise from the back, a shuffled paper, a muted gasp, caused every eye to snap in that direction. Something was stirring. Even in the moment of revelation, the courtroom felt the tension spike again. Everyone sensed that, though much had been exposed, the final, decisive truth was still about to fall. No one had been prepared for this. Not the attorneys, not the judge, not the reporters. A 3-year-old's clarity and a police dog's instinct had forced the unraveling of deception, exposing secrets that adults had thought safely hidden. And as the shadows flickered across the walls and Titan's eyes remained locked on the small child, the entire room knew in the pit of their stomachs that the story was not yet finished. The final moment was approaching. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting, suspended on the edge of revelation, knowing that in mere seconds, lives and the course of justice would be irrevocably changed. The courtroom was electric, every breath held in suspended anticipation. Jurors leaned forward, pens poised, notebooks trembling in their hands. Reporters clicked furiously, cameras flashing, but no one was focusing on them anymore. Every eye was fixed on the small figure in Sarah's lap and the massive German shepherd beside her. Lily's tiny hand was raised, finger pointed with unwavering clarity, and Titan's gaze never left hers, or the accused, Michael Harper. The judge's gavel fell once, then twice, attempting to assert control over the chaos. "Order," he called, voice firm yet layered with disbelief. "We will proceed with testimony." But even he knew that the usual rhythm of the trial had been shattered. No attorney, no jury instruction, no precedent could contain the force that a child and a dog had unleashed. Michael Harper's hands shook as his defense attorney whispered frantically, but Harper could no longer hear the words. Every instinct in his body screamed fear. He had meticulously prepared for months, rehearsing statements, memorizing every detail. Yet here he sat, exposed by innocence and instinct, powerless against a combination he could neither predict nor control. Reynolds stood, hands trembling, voice quaking as he recounted the sequence of events. I put the jacket there. I thought hiding it would protect him. I didn't think anyone would see. I didn't think anyone would." His voice broke. Tears streamed down his face as he admitted the full extent of his deception. Every word was magnified by Titan's presence, the dog's low, resonant growl emphasizing the weight of truth. The jurors were spellbound. Every detail, every subtle motion, every whispered confession was seared into their minds. Titan stepped closer to Lily, massive paw silent on the floor, a quiet sentinel of the truth. The child placed her small hand on his nose, and the courtroom collectively exhaled, a release of tension so intense it felt almost tangible. Prosecutors moved quickly, connecting the dots, tying Lily's observations, Reynolds' confession, Titan's instinct, and the physical evidence into a narrative that left no room for doubt. Photos of the blood-stained jacket, the hidden location, and the timestamp video were displayed, corroborating every accusation. The room was a storm of flashing lights, whispered gasps, and pounding hearts. Michael Harper's shoulders slumped, his lips trembling. The confident, controlled man who had entered the courtroom hours ago was gone. He whispered something to his attorney, words lost in the din, a plea that could not be answered. Every adult in the room felt the gravity of the moment. A tiny voice and a dog had dismantled a carefully constructed facade. The judge cleared his throat, eyes scanning the room, voice steadying. "The court acknowledges the extraordinary nature of the evidence and the testimony presented today. The jury will now deliberate with full consideration of the facts, including the insights provided by the child and confirmed by the K9. Titan's growl softened into a quiet rumble as he settled beside Lily, ears flicking occasionally to ensure nothing threatened the small child. Sarah's hand trembled as she held Lily close, the enormity of the day pressing down on her. Her daughter's innocence had become an instrument of truth, her clarity piercing the shadows of deception. The jury filed out to deliberate, their expressions grim yet focused. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting, as every person present realized the scale of what had transpired. The media whispered furiously, capturing moments that would become legend. A toddler, a dog, and the unmasking of deceit that adults could not perceive. Hours passed. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Every shuffle of papers, every whisper, every click of a camera shutter was magnified. Then finally the jury returned, their faces solemn but resolute. The judge's gavel fell lightly. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, voice firm. "We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant, Michael Harper, guilty on all counts." A wave of relief, shock, and disbelief swept the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, some letting out audible gasps. Michael Harper sagged in his seat, disbelief etched on every line of his face. Titan barked once, low and deliberate, as if acknowledging the justice of the moment. Lily giggled softly, a tiny, innocent sound that cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "You helped them see the truth." Lily smiled, her small hand reaching up to touch Titan's nose again. The dog nuzzled her gently, a bond forged in the chaos of revelation and the pursuit of justice. Reynolds slumped in his seat, weeping quietly. He had confessed fully, facing consequences, but he was now relieved of the burden he had carried. The courtroom slowly began to settle, murmurs of astonishment filling the space. Adults spoke in hushed tones, some shaking their heads in awe at the unthinkable chain of events. The judge addressed the room, voice steady but marked with awe. "This trial has demonstrated that truth can emerge from the most unexpected places. Today, a child and a K9 unit have reminded us that justice is not always about procedure. It is about courage, perception, and integrity." Titan sat beside Lily, massive body relaxed but alert, his loyalty unwavering. The child laughed softly, bouncing in her mother's lap, oblivious to the enormity of the impact she had had. The courtroom had witnessed the extraordinary, innocence exposing lies, instinct confirming truth, and a community reminded that justice could manifest in the most unlikely forms. As the spectators filed out, murmuring and whispering, reporters snapped the final photographs. Sarah held Lily's hand, walking slowly down the aisle, Titan at their side. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving sunlight glinting on wet pavement, a quiet, cinematic reflection of the storm that had passed within the courthouse walls. No one had been ready for a 3-year-old to wield the power of truth. No one had anticipated the K-9's instinct to confirm what was hidden. And yet, in that small courtroom, an unthinkable combination of courage, innocence, and loyalty had changed everything. Justice had been served. Lives had been forever altered. And in the center of it all, a tiny girl and a massive German shepherd had proven that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones we least expect.